story of Puss in Boots. Many years ago, an old poor miller died. He left his son Tom a black cat, nothing more. But this was no ordinary cat. He was very special. Not only was he very clever, but he could talk as well. "Master," he said, "don't be unhappy. Trust me, and I will make you a rich man." "But Puss," Tom said, feeling very sad, "what can you do?" "Just leave everything to me," the cat said. "Oh, well, I've nothing to lose," Tom laughed. "All I need is a pair of red boots," the cat said, "a cape and a hat with a feather." This he got, and looked very smart. With a cheery wave, Puss slung a sack over his shoulder and set out. On his way, he stopped by a river and waited for a fat fish to swim by. Quick as a flash, he scooped it out of the water and put it into his sack. Then he walked to the king's palace. "Take me to the king," he commanded the footman. With a flourish, he swept off his plumed hat and bowed low before the king, saying, "My master, the Marquis of Carabas, presents his compliments to your majesty and hopes you will accept this gift." He held out the fish. The king was delighted. He wondered who the Marquis of Carabas could be, for he'd never heard of him. Little did he know that Puss was speaking of Tom, the poor miller's son. Every day Puss brought more presents of fish or game to the king. Rabbits, pheasants, plump partridges, all from his master. When the king expressed his wish to meet the Marquis of Carabas, Puss had to think of a plan. He had to find the right clothes to make Tom into a nobleman. Soon Puss discovered that every day the king and his lovely daughter drove past the river in the royal coach. He told Tom to bathe in the river the next afternoon, and trusting his clever cat, Tom did so. When he was in the water, Puss grabbed his clothes and hid them, and when the royal coach came into sight, Puss began rushing up and down the path, looking very worried. "My poor master is drowning! Help!" he cried. The royal coach stopped, and the king, peering out of the window, immediately recognized Puss. When he heard that the Marquis was in danger, he ordered his men to rescue him from the river. Puss pretended to search for the Marquis's clothes and said that they'd been stolen. The king ordered one of his men to lend him a cloak, and so he was able to climb out of the river. "You shall have a royal suit of clothes," cried the king, and sent one of his men back to the palace to fetch it. "Thank you very much," said Tom. "You're most kind." When the suit arrived, it fitted Tom perfectly, and he looked very smart. Puss was so proud, and he introduced the Marquis to the king. "I'm so glad to meet you and have a chance to thank you for all those wonderful presents of game you've been sending me," the king said, shaking Tom's hand. Tom looked puzzled. What on earth was the king talking about? Marquis, presents? You must be mad. But Puss gave him a fierce nudge, and then he knew that it was part of the plan, and so he smiled at the king graciously. "May I present my daughter, the princess?" the king asked. She was a beautiful girl, and Tom immediately fell in love with her. "Come back with us to the palace," the king invited Tom. One of the courtiers had told Puss that all the lands nearby belonged to a giant magician who was living in a huge castle. So Puss thought of another plan. Running on ahead, he told all the workers in the fields to say that the lands belonged to the Marquis of Carabas. For saying this, they would be richly rewarded. The men willingly agreed, and the king was most impressed as he learned that all the lands were Tom's. Meanwhile, Puss had gone to the magician's castle. Bravely he marched into the great hall where the giant was sitting. The magician laughed out loud when he saw Puss in all his finery, but the clever cat was not put out. "I hear you are a great magician," he said humbly. "I'm the greatest," the giant boasted. "The greatest?" Puss echoed in wonder. "I can do anything I want," the magician said. I wonder if you really are so clever, Puss said daringly. The magician jumped up and roared in fury. You dare to doubt me? I can do anything. Puss was just a little bit scared then, for the magician was 7 feet tall and looked very fearsome. But Puss had to pursue his plan. Can you change into an animal? He asked. An animal? That's easy, the giant said. He got up and muttered some strange words. Puss watched in silence, wondering what would happen next. With a roar, the magician turned into an enormous lion. He looked so fierce, with his teeth bared and his paws raised, that Puss fell off his chair. When he'd suggested an animal, he had no idea that the magician would turn into a lion. What could he do now? The lion jumped straight at Puss, roaring in his rage, but the cat quickly hid under the table, making himself as small as possible. The great beast roared and growled, trying to hit Puss with his great paws. Puss thought hard. Maybe he could bring the magician back into his human shape. Can you also change back? He asked, and instantly the magician stood before him. Oh, that was very clever, Puss said admiringly. I told you I could do anything, the giant said, smiling and infinitely pleased with himself. But surely, Puss said cunningly, it's quite easy for someone as big as you to turn into a large animal. It would be really clever if you could turn into a small animal. I can do anything I wish, the giant boasted. Well, could you, for instance, turn into something very small? Something like a mouse? Puss asked, licking his tongue. Just watch me, the magician cried. Once more he stood up and uttered the magic words. And there, as quick as a flash, instead of the magician, a tiny mouse scampered across the floor. This was just what Puss had hoped for. Swiftly he pounced on the mouse and gobbled him up, tail and all. And that was the end of the giant. Now Puss had to make the castle ready to receive his master, and later the king and princess. Puss called all the servants of the castle into the great hall and told them how he'd killed the wicked magician. They were overjoyed at the news, for the magician had been a cruel master, and they had to work very hard. Puss told them to prepare a great banquet. Your new master, the Marquis of Carabas, is staying with the king and princess at the palace, but they will be coming here as guests. Everybody set to work, and a huge feast was prepared. Meanwhile, Puss had sent a messenger to Tom to ask him to come and see his new castle. Tom couldn't believe his eyes. When all was ready, Puss told his master to invite the king and princess. They arrived and were delighted with what they saw. Puss, who was in charge of the staff, had found a huge store of gold and silver in the vaults of the castle, so that his master was now a rich man. The princess soon fell in love with the Marquis, and the king gave his blessing to their marriage. They made a handsome couple, and at their wedding, Puss, dressed in a new velvet suit, proudly carried the bride's train. The Marquis and the princess were very happy, and Puss was a great hero. He and his master went all around the kingdom, deposing of many wicked magicians and barons, and soon there was peace and happiness everywhere. The people clapped their hands and cheered the noble Marquis and his faithful Puss. But Tom never forgot that he was just a miller's son, and always helped the poor and the needy whenever he could. Everyone grew to love him as a wise and kind man, but he knew he owed it all to Puss. The Marquis and the princess had many children and lived happily ever after. As for Puss, he found himself a pussy princess with long whiskers and soft, soft fur, so he was very happy too. He smiles now when he remembers the old days at the mill, so long, long ago.